I did promise the chapter at the Bothell to go through some resume reviews, and I think we, just for the sake of time, we need to kind of move into that segment. Jessica, Jim is unfortunately no longer here. Do you mind kind of leading the resume review?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I mean, there weren't ones that were like blocked out. You sent me a list of a few of them that I did go over, so you just want to talk about kind of the points that I saw from those?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do you want to share your screen, or would you prefer I manage the screen sharing?
You can manage the screen sharing, I think,
Okay.
since you have them readily available.
Yeah.
So I think just on a few of the questions I know we had here, the 1 or 2 pager. This one's always really funny. It is not black and white. If you have, so my resume for 1 pager is not going to work. I do have a 2 pager. When you start going over two, it starts to get a little lengthy. So really what you want to think about, the information you put on your resume isn't relevant to the job you are applying for. Many of the resumes I saw have a lot of education on them. There are some of them that are starting to get those internships. You're starting to grow your resume. As that grows, maybe you don't put you were a grocery cashier. It's depending on which job you're applying for. Sometimes I add things from my history, sometimes I take them off. When I'm applying for, I've done a lot of aerospace stuff. When I'm applying for something that's a little bit more diverse out of aerospace, I'll make sure to bring on. I was a distribution center manager that ran a fulfillment center for 200 stores. I understand how shipping, receiving, forklifting, inventory, all of that works. So sometimes I may pull that on my resume, but if I'm doing aerospace or something specific, I may take that one off. So you customizing your resume for the job is something to think about, especially as you're adding experience and projects that you're working. Yes. So yes, 2 pages are okay as long as it's relevant to the job.
I also have a
Absolutely.
2 pager now. Um, and the format changes all the time. Just be ready to keep and save versions of different formats. Like I have a folder for every company I've ever applied for. That way I can see history and remind myself. Like the one for SolidWorks, my SME leadership experience was at the very top. Never done that before. It was a bold move.
Mm.
It was the center point of a lot of conversations. So you never know how you're going to have to tailor it.
Yeah, and that surprised me on a few of these. I noticed a lot of the resumes had education as the first thing, which was really interesting because when I'm in an industry and I'm looking at people, education is good, but I also, for me, the weighted priority is what is your experience? What have you done? What have you not done? Yes, education is good, but I almost think that is as you're growing that. And I think there were a lot of student projects where you're giving examples of, I'm in this project, I did this, I put this together. You're showing project management, you're showing your technical skills. That's going to be a heavier weight than I have the degree or the pedigree that came from school. So think of it like a first impression, right? My first impression is you is what you tell me in the first 30 to 60 seconds. Put that part relevant to the job up first. And in my opinion, when I look at that from an industry standpoint.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I think I remember another one. There was 1 or 2 that had a metric. If you can quantify what you've done, put it in there. If you did something that increased, you came up with a design that improved the strength of the product by 20%. You improved a process that reduced design development time by 2 months or 20%. If you can quantify what you did on as a project, or based on your project, these were results or outcomes of your project, put that in there. That was something, like I said, I saw a lot of good projects from people, but a lot of them were missing what they did. But there was 1 or 2 that had, I think it was like a 20 or 30% improvement or something like that. People want to
Yeah.
see that, especially your
Yeah.
engineers and you're working with technical people. We like numbers.
Totally.
Yeah.
So being able to see what your specific impact was, I think is really important.
Anybody familiar with the STAR method?
Yeah.
Situation, task, action, result. It's I constantly have to remind myself to rewrite my resume in that format. So like what she's saying, people can scan and see the history, the story of everything you've been involved with.
Those are also heavily used in interviews. As you guys go into the interview process, pay attention to what they want to hear. So, like I said, taking the resume, and let's say you're now interviewing for a process, there are situations as a hiring manager where I have a scorebook and you have to answer something in each of those boxes. And let's say it's a star or a SAR or whatever you want to call it. Listen to what they're looking for. So if they say, give me a situation, tell me the task you did, the action, and what were the results. From a scoring manager, we have to have something from you for each of those. So it has nothing to do with do we like you or were you great? In some of those interviews, I have had to put a comment for each of those in order for you to pass that interview. So like I said, it's very important to listen when they give you something specific to fill out. And to Matthew's point, write it down so you don't forget that. I've done that several times. Also, create, as you're getting some of these experience, document them. I have a whole Word doc that's like, here's an example where I had to meet a scheduled deadline. Here's what I did. Here's an example where I had a conflict with someone at work. So start to build that deliverable. So when you go to get ready to interview, you almost study that and you can tailor those. Like if you applied Amazon, we have Amazon principles. You can tailor those to hit those company principles or their vision or what they're looking for in the interviews. And then you have your resume to back that up.
I've got a specific comment too about the resumes that we're seeing. White space. It's a big one.
Yeah.
A lot of good information in a lot of these, but it's very dark towards the middle.
Yeah.
The easier, that one's a lot easier to scan for sure. It's something I constantly have to take it, squint my eyes. How dark is the middle of the page? It's really that simple. When people are flying through these hundreds at a time, scanning them, and having a flow throughout it where if you're an exec with 10 seconds to look at something, you can find it in the first 3 inches of the page. Is this person going to work? And then they can keep exploring through the first and second page to get more depth. What do you think, Jessica? Is that?
I like sections. If you see my resume, it is very section. Like this is my, you know exactly what it is. Here's the company. Here's what I did. Here's the company. Here's my job role. My education separate. I have speaking engagements on mine. Like it's very sectional with data supporting those sections. Yeah. Because it's like, think about how you feel when you have to read a textbook, right? How many times you open that, like thermodynamics or heat transfer, where it's like you open the book and it's like,
Yes.
ah, it's the same thing. How can you make it attractive, but not like completely marketing crazy, lots of symbols and stuff like that? And I know I was laughing. I didn't even think about, so the green, think about colors that colorblind people have a hard time with too. That was something from a system perspective when we code and choose colors, that green and orange or doing something too light. It's really crazy, but think from like a UX design perspective, some of those colors, there are standard colors for a reason sometimes because they're easier to see or they may not, they may be harder to see with disabilities or stuff like that. So kind of keep that in mind too. Green's my favorite color. So I hate saying that, but green is a really big one with colorblind.
We talked about why bother networking.
Mhm.
One of the biggest examples, peer review of these. If you can get someone 5 steps or 5 levels ahead of you in their career to peer review your resume, do that 3 or 4 times, you now have an incredible cross section of perspective to come back. To me, that is way more useful than paying a resume writer that knows nothing about me or the industry I'm in or any people I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think these were actually, I think most of the ones I saw were pretty well done. I deal with a lot of people that have the hardest time writing about themselves. So I've had several people contact me like, hey, can you take a look at my resume? And I look at it and I'm like, you are not giving yourself credit. So to Matthew's part, us knowing what you do or having a friend that knows that can point out to that, like, this is your chance to brag about yourself. And bragging about ourselves is very hard. Saying I did this and not we is very hard. So sometimes we have to push you as a mentor and say, okay, you said we did this project, yada, yada. What did you do? What were your specific tasks? What did you contribute to that? Now put it in words. And when I start working with, like I said, women have a really hard time with this. But when I start working with them and like pulling that out there, and I'll maybe take a bullet and reword it for them, they're like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. Yes, you were amazing on that project. So sometimes we have to help kind of push that to the next level.
And I really
So-
like what Oren did by putting his LinkedIn profile up there,
Yeah.
directing people towards online content. That's a unique opportunity to put those together, and making sure they both match is huge. Every time you update one, you got to hold it. PDF, there's a PDF output. I forget where you can Google it, but you can download your own other people's profiles. I have a dossier on so many people at DS by outputting them to PDFs and getting like a war room to get. I go off the board with it, but anyhow, two parallel universes: resume, online content. Great to keep them connected.
We'll let the
I
red
think
string.
LinkedIn is important as we're kind of moving into this technology level. You can give me a piece of paper, but I can't necessarily see who you are. I do look at LinkedIn when I have people apply, when I know I'm interviewing, if I have someone reach out as, wanting a mentor, an opportunity. Again, I'm your big LinkedIn stalker. I'm going to go stalk what you post. What, is it content that I want to recommend for someone? Because you think about when we give you opportunities and when things come up, I'm putting my name on you. And if I look at your stuff and it's either not aligned to my values or my mission, or I feel that it would make me look bad, I'm going to think second about that, So social media and postings, keep that in mind.
Hey, since we've got Oren in the group and his resumes up there, if we take Jessica's couple of comments, can you scroll back to the top, Alex, on his?
Absolutely.
Oren, you might want to consider taking your education, putting it down at the bottom, let the experience shift to the top, rise to the top. You heard Matt say white space is a good thing. So you might want to think about changing the format just so it doesn't look like the text is running off the edge of the paper. Makes it a little easier to read. The eye can follow it a little easier. Something both of them implied was that you had nice statements of action and activity with result. So I got to give you kudos in your bullets. They are lots of action verbs and end results, which are worthwhile. They were also talking about readability. You got a couple of repeats in a big font thing. So you might want to rebalance that a little bit because they may bring your eye to it, but they're hard to follow. And if you're trying to get me to see that what you accomplished in those areas, it might fall flat a little bit. You heard Matt say the LinkedIn and data at the top is really useful. If you scroll down a little further, lots of team leader, lots of titles that catch people's attention. People are going to say, what's a founder, a product advisor? You are a product advisor? That's wicked. A team leader, always liked leadership in our resumes. And then your skills are really important. So that's why putting your education down with your skills are probably a better way. That way, to Jessica's point, you hook her with an accomplishment or a quantifiable accomplishment. And then if she's curious what gave you that substantiation, she can look later to see what your education background was up to that point. And I think I'll let them weigh in on it. But most times in the industry, as much as prestige is out there, most employers want to know what you can accomplish. And that's why she's saying actions speak louder than words as far as the education is concerned. But in some cases, you do need to meet minimum requirements. So at some of the bigger companies, I don't know, Amazon might come to mind. they have thresholds of accomplishment that you need to meet as an entry-level requirement. So that's where the education might come back in as a deal breaker, meaning if I had two candidates identical to what you have on yours, Oren, if the education was the deal breaker, then they jump down to the education to see what you had on it. And the final summary on what you've got going there, I noticed you chose the summary of the objective statement, which is cool. It helps people clarify a little bit who you are in a bigger picture, but be sure and address exactly what they had in the job posting. What Jessica and both Matt mentioned earlier is you got to listen to what they're asking for and address that question. And that's why you end up with more than one version of a resume. Because if you want Jessica to stay on your resume, she got the job, she posted the job, she articulated, she knows what she's looking for. And if you can't catch her with the thought process of answering her question of what she needs to solve her problem, she's going to move on. So if your summary statement doesn't speak to that and it speaks to a different type of job, right after the paragraph, they're going to go, they really don't want to work here. And they're going on to the next resume. Is that fair, Matt? Jessica?
Totally. And the customization we're talking about takes a lot of time and thought. Why we network? What companies are worth all this time and thought? You only have so many hours a day. If you're already going to school, if you're already working, whatever, you can't customize this to this level to 50 different applications. You need a network to help you pare those down into opportunities you know that are going to be receptive, that are going to pay well, that have a good culture. You know, we could go on for that for an hour. But I totally agree with everything that's been said. You have to tailor it. And there's so many good things, even the two we're looking at here for potential. I think like 1 or 2 meetings with a mentor could have these in tip-top shape. It's all there. It just needs some organizational formatting. But I mean, these are people that work really hard. They get good grades. They care. They're very involved. I mean, both of them right now.
Yeah.
To Bill's point, I think we had a question before about do a cover letter. I love cover letters. That is me. So instead of having a 2 or 3 sentence summary, I like to customize a cover letter specifically to that company, whoever is offering that job, saying why I am the best pick for this job. It's not even in my resume. I always put a cover letter, say I'm applying, to, the job poster of yada yada at Lockheed Martin. I am applying for this job. Why I'm interested in the job, what are the skills that I think I can bring that can elevate that job. That is, let's say, my sales page is my cover letter that differentiates me from someone else. Because right now, if you put Kendall and Oren right next to each other, yes, I see your employments, I see your education, but they're all check boxes. There's very little personality when I look at this because it's bulleted. The cover letter is where you can shine your personality. It's, again, you're going back to bragging about yourself and it's really hard, but I always do a custom cover letter specifically for each job I apply to if I really want it.
I really appreciate all the feedback. Thank you. Very useful.
Okay.
Another reason to network, I'll make this short, I promise. Jessica's talking about cover letters. I've written them. I cannot stand writing them. I would much rather talk to people, right? But I do it anyway. The goal being you've networked with someone ahead of time that's in the company that can say, man, this person is exactly the right fit. Here's why. There's a conversation happening inside of the company about you before you've even applied, which was the story with me with this role. I had people working for me to get this far already, and we were a team that made it happen. It's not relying on one piece of paper or 2 or 3 of the cover letter. It's everything.
Absolutely. So kind of with that, we're gonna move on just to the next section, just for the sake of time. The next section was I should say, do we have any questions from the students in the audience first? Because we really need to make sure that we hear from our students.
Warren, you still got your camera on.
Yeah, we're all looking at you, Oren.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question. So
I'm gonna bring up your resume again, Oren. Sorry,
okay, no problem. Well, when we were looking at mine and Kendall's side by side, one of the differences, you mentioned white space on mine. So Kendall's has a lot of white space, but it went on to 2 pages. So I think mine might go on to 2 pages as well if I add a bunch of white space. Would that be okay? Or should I try to keep it down?
So, Oren, you have a lot of experience on yours. That's fine. It's when you started looking at the specific project and roles and stuff like that, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, yeah. I mean, some of those
Yeah.
positions are from a while ago from high school. So if I had to shrink, I would probably remove.
Yeah. So as you get into that first and second job, some of those may fall off as you're moving into your career. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So someone wrote in the chat, "What's a CV style resume?"
oh, that's
The
just
thing is,
everything.
yeah, it's everything you've ever done, and if you ever get into working in education, recognize they're really probably going to want to see that.
So I always say the CV would be like you read the entire play. A resume would be the Cliff Note version.
Yeah.